Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another Halloween horror movie review. Today we're going to be talking about 1940's The Mummy's Hand, continuing our journey through the Universal Monsters saga. Yeah, so The Mummy's Hand is not actually a sequel to the 1932 film The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff. No, it's actually something of a reboot, and a reboot that became a series of mummy films, all of which had their own continuity. So we had 4 movies back to back that basically give us this wonderful continuing story of The Mummy. So let's take a look at the very first one, The Mummy's Hand, today on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. So our story opens in a mysterious temple somewhere in Egypt with an old man who is the high priest of Karnak, and he's speaking to his younger disciple about what their purpose is and what they do. So the high priests of Karnak are charged with taking care of Kharis, who is a living mummy. Every month, by the light of the full moon, they are to make a special sacred elixir from 3 tanna leaves. And the 3 tanna leaves will keep Kharis' heart beating. It'll keep him alive. It'll maintain his unliving mummy status. However, if anything should happen in which the temple is profaned or there's somebody that they need to deal with who threatens their order or their secrets, they are to prepare a mixture of 9 tanna leaves, and 9 tanna leaves will give the mummy mobility, and then he can be sent off to deal with whoever needs to be dealt with. So as the old man is explaining how to prepare the tanna leaves, he's also providing the backstory of Kharis and why he is a living mummy. And the backstory is very similar to what we saw in the 1932 film. In fact, it's almost note for note exactly the same. Kharis, in this case, was deeply in love with and involved with a high priestess by the name of Ananka. Ananka died, and he profaned the temple to acquire the tanna leaves that could bring her back to life. Well, he was caught, wrapped in mummy bandages against his will, and buried alive. But the priests of Karnak have kept him alive all this time, after centuries and centuries, through generations and generations of high priests, through the use of the tanna leaves mixture. Now, I should mention, as we're getting the flashback of the story of Kharis and Ananka and how all that played out, there's a lot of footage in there that is completely ripped off from the 1932 film. In fact, if you look closely, you can probably see this a little more clearly on the Blu-ray now, you can actually clearly see Boris Karloff standing there amongst all the other Egyptians. The only new footage they've added is footage of Tom Tyler, who plays the mummy in this one, defiling the tomb. And of course, the one big change, in the 1932 version, it was Imhotep and Ankhsenamen, and he used an incantation to try to bring Ankhsenamen back to life. At least that was his intention, and then he got caught and got buried alive and blah, 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 blah. Go see the 1932 movie for that whole story. This one plays out much the same. The difference is it's tanna leaves instead of the incantation. So it's this special elixir made from these rare leaves of this long extinct plant that are used to keep the mummy alive. And presumably, much like the incantation in the 1932 one, hold the secret to everlasting life. So, of course, when Ananka died in ancient times, Kharis wanted to use the tanna leaves to bring her back to life so they would never have to be apart. But, well, that backfired on him. So now the high priests essentially protect Ananka's tomb, and Kharis is buried near Ananka's tomb. So if anyone should profane or violate the tomb, they can bring Kharis back to life by the light of the full moon and send him off to kill whoever defiled the temple. So the old man is dying, and the disciple is in fact his replacement. So he gives us all this backstory that explains it all to us, the viewers, as he's explaining it to his replacement, his disciple. So then the scene shifts to a bazaar, a marketplace out on the streets of Egypt, and we meet our heroes. We have Steve Banning, played by Dick Foran, who is an archaeologist. He used to work for a museum. He was out there looking for artifacts, anything interesting he could bring back. He wasn't finding anything, to the point where the museum actually wants to sack him. And he's there with his good friend and associate, Babe Jensen, played by the always wonderful Wallace Ford. Now, it's interesting seeing the interplay between them, because you can't help but draw a comparison to Abbott and Costello. And I'm sure that that wasn't unintentional at the time. Of course, Abbott and Costello were on the rise at the time, so any kind of little comedic interplay they could get and see if they could hit lightning in a bottle again. Yeah, they're no Abbott and Costello, but you do get a bit of a vibe of that. Babe Jensen is kind of the comic relief character a little bit. He's a little bit silly, kind of goofs around, jokes around a little bit. And Steve Banning is very much the straight man. But, we get a little bit of a Abbott and Costello vibe during that bizarre scene. But then it kind of goes off its own way in there. So it might have just been a little nod to Abbott and Costello. I don't know. But you definitely get a vibe of that in that initial scene. So as they're exploring around the bazaar, Steve finds something at one of the marketplaces that catches his eye. There's a lot of trinkets and just kind of rip-off imitation items and whatnot, but he's a trained professional. He's been in the business for a while, we gather. So he can spot genuine artifact and tell it apart from a fake, more or less at a glance. So he finds a broken vase, and the broken vase has some interesting inscriptions in it that suggest the possible location of a hidden tomb that's been rumored to be in the area, but nobody knows exactly where it is. So he's thinking, if I can find this tomb, then, that's going to be a huge, significant archaeological find. It'll put me back on the map. The problem is the museum that he works for is basically run out of patience and won't give them any money for the expedition. So they're kind of stuck. So going to one of the local bars, Babe is doing some sleight-of-hand card tricks to try to scare up a little bit of cash for them just so they can get a bite to eat and maybe a few drinks. So in the process, Babe meets a man who he tries the card trick on, but it doesn't work. So it turns out this man is actually a traveling magician, and he's just kind of playing with him a little bit because he knows the trick. He knows how it works, of course. And the traveling magician is the great Salvani, played by the also great Cecil Kellaway, who we just saw as the police inspector Sampson in The Invisible Man Returns, actually earlier the same year. But this role, I have to say, for Cecil Kellaway is just so much fun. Salvani is just such a likable, charming, endearing character, and the interplay with he and Babe is a lot of fun. We actually see a lot of little lighter moments between the two, and they're just a joy to watch. So they get to talking with Salvani. They all hit it off and, become fast friends and decide to tell him about the expedition that they're trying to put together, but they need funding. Now, Salvani was about to leave Egypt because there wasn't a lot going on. People weren't coming to his shows. He wasn't making very much money, but he had a few grand stashed away that, after talking with Steve and Babe, decided, yeah, why not? It might be fun. I'll invest in your expedition. So Steve takes the vase to one of his associates, a Dr. Petrie, played by Charles Trowbridge, and shows it to him. And Dr. Petrie is overjoyed. He's like, wow, this actually might show the actual location of the tomb of Ananka. We've been looking for this forever. So they go to show it to the head of the department. The head of the department turns around, and it's a Professor Andoheb, who we immediately recognize as the disciple from the Order of the High Priest of Karnak. So one of his jobs as the High Priest, the now High Priest of Karnak, because the old man is dead, so he's taken over as head of the order, is to protect the location of the tomb of Ananka. I mean, that's their whole purpose, is to protect that tomb. That's their sacred, devoted purpose. So he tries to convince Steve and Petrie and everybody that, oh no, this vase is a fake. It's not real, and you've just been swindled. But Steve and Dr. Petrie aren't having any of that. They're pretty sure that for whatever reason, Professor Andoheb is lying to them and it is actually genuine. So catching wind that they're still planning their expedition and they're going to go anyway, Professor Andoheb goes to Marta Sovani, who is the great Sovani's daughter, who is also his assistant for all his magician acts, and tries to convince her that her father has just been swindled by these guys claiming that they're going to take him out on an expedition and make a lot of money, but really they're just going to kill him out in the middle of the desert. So he tries to instill this paranoia in her. But when she actually meets with Steve and Babe and everybody, then she realizes that, no, these guys aren't swindlers. What was that guy talking about? So Andoheb has been just trying tooth and nail to throw them off the track, to get them to, either not be able to get funding or convince them that the vase is fake, just to throw them off the trail and keep them away from the tomb of Ananka. So needless to say, the vase is indeed not fake, and it actually does show the location of the tomb of Ananka, and they find it. However, inside the tomb, they don't find the body of Ananka, they find the body of a man. A mummified man, and they're kind of confused as to what's going on. So it's still an impressive find. I mean, they found this mysterious mummy, and there's strange aspects to the mummy as well, that he, just judging from the position of the body and the face and the skin and everything, that there was a struggle when he was wrapped, that he was wrapped while he was still alive. So Professor Andoheb, at the light of the full moon, brews a potion of 9 tanna leaves and gives it to Kharis, the mummy. And Kharis is given very specific instructions, saying that, well, these people have defiled the tomb of Ananka and must be destroyed. So Andoheb gave them every chance to turn back. They would not turn back, so there's no other course of action as far as he's concerned, other than to send the mummy after them. And that's when the real horror begins. As to how all that plays out and who dies and who lives and what happens, you'll just have to watch the movie. But that's the basic idea. I just wanted to illustrate for you how it's similar to the old one. It borrows a lot of similar plot elements, but then it kind of goes off in its own direction. One other thing about the mummy, which the old man goes into at the beginning, specifically with regards to the tanna leaves, is if the mummy is given 12 tanna leaves, or more than 12 tanna leaves, he will remain alive and mobile, but uncontrollable. He'll just be a rampaging monster, essentially. Now, the whole thing about the 12 tanna leaves twist, I think, was abandoned in the sequels. I don't recall hearing about that in any of the following sequels. But there is one aspect to Kharis which remains consistent, and that is he is fixated on getting more of the tanna leaf solution all the time. And that becomes a pretty big plot point in this one as well, that he's trying to get more of the tanna fluid. For example, what Andoheb's assistant will do is leave a vial of the tanna leaf fluid in the tents of whoever he wants Kharis to go after. So that's one way that they can lead him to where they want him to go. They also give him just verbal instructions saying, this person defiled the tomb, they need to be killed. And so he goes after them. But the incentive for Kharis is that he gets more of the tanna fluid. So it's almost like it's a drug addiction for him in a way. I mean, it's necessary in that it keeps him alive and keeps him going. But also he is insatiable as far as needing more and more and more. It's kind of interesting because I talked about how in the 1932 film it borrowed a lot of plot elements from Dracula from the year before. And in a way, this addiction to the tanna fluid is very similar to how a vampire needs to feed on blood constantly. So in this case, the mummy needs a steady supply of the tanna fluid in order to stay mobile. So it's interesting to see the little parallels. And in particular interesting because the whole mummy story was cut from whole cloth, if you will, by Universal. I mean, they just made it all up. There was no previous legend or story. I mean, some of it was loosely based on the stories of some, like for example, Imhotep in the original actually existed back in ancient Egypt. He was an architect of the pyramids. Kharis, however, I think is just a fabrication, just a character they made up. So as the first in a series, it actually works quite well, I think. There is a sufficiently open ending, at the end, and I think they've established enough of the new take on the premise that it could easily be continued in further movies, and in fact was for 3 more movies. So I actually really enjoy the Kharis cycle of mummy movies, in particular because it has such a tight continuity between them. One thing I will mention, and this will become important as we dive into the sequels, when does this one take place? Well, there's a scene actually where Marta is handed the contract that her father signed with Steve and Babe. And at the top of the contract, it very clearly shows a date of May 12th, 1940. So we know for a fact that this takes place in May of 1940, up to, I guess, the night of the full moon that month, whenever that was. So keep that date in mind when we talk about the sequels. So remember, the original clearly, plainly took place in May of 1940. I know you probably think I'm kind of crazy making a big point of the date, but trust me, when we go into the sequels, we'll be coming back to that. Another thing I should mention, you may recall in my review of Son of Frankenstein how there was an old comic book adaptation made of it using photos from the film. Well, there was actually a comic book adaptation of The Mummy's Hand as well. Yeah, it appeared in issue number 2 of Monster World from 1965. If you'd like to check out all 7 pages of the adaptation, you'll find a link to the blog where I found it in the description, so enjoy that. I gotta say, the artwork in that was pretty good, too. Like, they did a very nice job, depicting the likenesses of the characters from the movie. A couple of things I found odd about it, however, is they misspell Ananka. It's supposed to be A-N-A-N-K-A, so Ananka. But they spelled it Anunka with A-N-U-N-K-A instead. And instead of Kharis, which is just K-H-A-R-I-S, they spelled it Kharis with an extra A in there, so K-A-H-A-R-I-S. God, it's turned into a spelling bee. I don't know why. I don't know, maybe if it was a rights issue, they couldn't... didn't fully have the rights to the names, maybe, but that doesn't make sense because they clearly made likenesses of the characters. So I don't know. It's very strange. I should also mention Tom Tyler as the Mummy. I actually really liked Tom Tyler as the Mummy. Now, Tom Tyler, prior to this, had really made his name doing westerns more than anything else. He was actually a leading man in a lot of western films throughout the 30s and 40s. He was also in a couple of movie serials. 2 that you guys might know. We have The Adventures of Captain Marvel. Yeah, he was in The Adventures of Captain Marvel, the first superhero serial ever. And he was also in the movie serial adaptation of The Phantom. Yeah, the Mummy was the Phantom. Go figure. But yeah, I actually really liked his turn as the Mummy. I thought he was genuinely creepy and scary, and they had these wonderful shots of when the Mummy is coming at someone where it's like they manually colored in his eyes to be black, so you get these black soulless eyes, and just sort of the way he moved was very, like, almost, I don't know how to describe it, lizard-like, serpentine a little bit, like kind of like he's gonna get you, it's an interesting use of the body language to kind of show, almost like he's struggling against the stiffness of his own limbs and such. But he always did these sort of interesting angles and reaching, which I thought really added to the creepiness. Especially since a lot of the other Mummy movies we've seen just kind of show him very stiff and lumbering, and he doesn't really do a lot of body movements, if you know what I mean. So it just added to the creepiness factor of it, and I really liked that. I thought it worked really well. So, sadly, we never got Tom Tyler back as the Mummy. It was Lon Chaney Jr. played the Kharis in the remaining 3 films. But yeah, I mean, as a one-off performance, it's definitely a notable one. And I know there's been some premium action figures and so forth made of his version of the Mummy over the years, and it is quite highly regarded by fandom, I think. But yeah, so The Mummy's Hand is a good one. I've actually watched it quite a few times, and usually when I sit down to watch them, I'll watch all four of them back to back, because each one of the Mummy sequels actually only runs about an hour, like 60, 61 minutes. So it's literally like watching an episode of a TV show. And you can sit down and watch all four of them in one go quite comfortably. It's like the length of 2 regular movies. And that's often how I do it, is I'll just sit down and I'll watch all of them back to back, just kind of as a mini marathon. Interesting bit of behind-the-scenes trivia for you. The massive temple set in which the climactic final confrontation with the mummy takes place was actually left over from... Yeah, this was at a point where Universal was beginning to cut corners with the production costs, but hey, I mean, you got a big honkin' temple set, why not make use of it as many ways as you can, right? Another trivia tidbit for you regarding the mummy's makeup, once again by Jack Pierce. It was only in the close-ups of Tom Tyler where he would have the full mummy makeup with all the wrinkles and detailing and so forth. In the long shots, he was actually wearing a rubber mask version, which apparently was a lot more comfortable than the regular makeup. But with the shots being so far away, you couldn't really tell. So there you go. The Mummy's Hand. Good stuff. Alrighty, well that is it from me to you for now, so I will see you next time. If you'd like to add the Mummy Legacy Collection or the entire Universal Monsters Legacy Collection to your Blu-ray library, you will find Amazon links in the description below for both Amazon.com and .ca, depending where you are in the world. So, as always, thank you very much for your support. And thank you for watching. And big thanks to my Patreon sponsors. Be sure to catch me on Twitch. I stream just about every day. And we'll see you next time. Until then, sayonara.